He scratched at my door like he lived there. A German Shepherd puppy, muddy, shaking, wearing a frayed piece of red fabric around his neck like a child's scarf, looked up at me with the kind of eyes that ask nothing and promise everything. It was just after noon, a sharp wind-bitten day in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'd been drinking lukewarm coffee in silence, listening to leaves scrape along the sidewalk like dry whispers, when I heard it. A soft, steady scratching at the front door. Not desperate, not wild, just patient, intentional. I opened the door, and there he was. About 6 months old, I guessed. Black and tan fur soaked through with dirty puddle water. His ribs were a little too visible, one ear slightly folded down, and his paws trembled on the concrete. But it was the red scarf that stopped me cold. It wasn't tied like a collar. It was looped and knotted loosely, the way a child might dress up a stuffed animal. He didn't bark, he didn't whine, just sat down, right on my welcome mat, and stared up at me like he knew me, like he'd made a decision I hadn't yet. I said the only thing that made sense, "Where did you come from?" He didn't flinch, just blinked, then looked past me, into the house. I hadn't had a dog since I was 10. My dad brought home a shepherd mix when my mom left. He used to say, "Some dogs don't wait to be rescued. They come find you." I thought it was a nice story, something you tell a kid so they sleep better at night. But now I was standing face to face with a German shepherd puppy who looked like he'd read my story better than I had. My name's Mark, by the way, 45. Divorced. No kids. Just me in a house too quiet for its own good. I hadn't planned on adopting anything. I barely took care of myself. But the way he sat there, not pleading, just present, made me feel like I didn't have a choice. Still, I didn't let him in. I brought out an old towel and placed it on the porch. I filled a chipped ceramic bowl with lukewarm water and another with a few slices of leftover turkey. He sniffed it, ate slowly, never once took his eyes off me. "Okay," I muttered. "Stay as long as you want." I closed the door gently, leaving the curtain open, watched him through the glass as he curled up on the towel, head on his front paws like he was finally home, like he'd done this before. And that's when it hit me. What if he had? What if this German Shepherd puppy hadn't gotten lost at all? What if he came here for me? The next morning, he was still there. I cracked the door and found him sitting exactly where I'd left him, on the towel, nose tucked between his paws, eyes open like he hadn't slept at all. The red scarf was damp and dirty now, clinging to his neck like it meant something. He looked up, ears twitching, but made no move to stand. "You're really not going anywhere, are you?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly, then shifted his weight just enough to straighten his posture. Dignified. Composed. Like a soldier on guard duty. This wasn't a lost stray begging for help. This German Shepherd puppy had shown up with purpose. I opened the door wider. He didn't move. "You want in or not?" I asked, half hoping he'd say no. Still nothing, just that steady gaze. I stepped back, left the door open, and waited. After a few seconds, he rose to his feet, shook off the dew from his coat, and walked in, slowly, silently, without hesitation. He paused in the hallway, sniffed the baseboards, then made his way to the living room and sat near the fireplace, even though it hadn't been used in years. That's when I noticed. He didn't look afraid, not even uncertain. He walked like he already knew the place. I stood there, unsure what to do. Feed him? Bathe him? Call someone? Was this someone's pet? Did I just commit to something I wasn't ready for? I went to the kitchen and opened a can of plain chicken. As soon as I peeled the lid, he trotted in and sat neatly by the doorframe, watching, not begging. "Okay, soldier," I murmured. "You've earned it." He ate slowly again. Every few bites, he'd look up at me like he was checking I was still there. When he finished, he licked the bowl once, then lay down with a quiet sigh. I reached for the red scarf. He stiffened, not a growl, just a pause. I let my hand hover there. "I won't take it. Just curious," I said. He relaxed again. The fabric was worn, soft, faded fleece with faint traces of lavender-scented detergent. A child's clothing, no doubt. But there were no initials, no tag, nothing to tell me who he belonged to or who belonged to him. That afternoon, I didn't work. I didn't go for a walk or call the vet. I just sat in the recliner across from the fireplace, watching the puppy sleep like he was guarding something, like he had nowhere else in the world to be. And for the first time in a long while, neither did I. I still didn't know what he wanted from me. I didn't know what he'd lost or why he chose my door. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this puppy wasn't looking for a home. He was offering one. That evening, I found myself whispering his name before I even knew I'd given him one. Benny. It just slipped out, quiet, instinctive. He lifted his head, ears twitching, eyes half open but alert. Like he recognized it. I tried again. Benny. This time, his tail thumped once on the rug, just once. You're kidding me, I muttered, sitting forward. Is that your name? Or do you just like the way I say it? He stood up, stretched, front paws long, tail wagging lazily, and walked over to me, sat at my feet. Looked up like he'd been waiting all day for me to say it out loud. That sealed it. Benny. It fit. It sounded like trust. Like something light enough to say in a whisper and strong enough to shout across a field. I hadn't said anyone's name in this house in weeks. He nudged his head against my knee. I scratched behind his ears, surprised by how quickly it felt natural. Comfortable. Familiar. Later that night, I unrolled an old sleeping bag beside the couch, unsure if he'd stay. But when I woke around 2 a.m., he was still curled up on it, breathing slow and steady, occasionally twitching in sleep, chasing something in a dream I could only guess at. The next morning, we walked. The air was sharp with the scent of turning leaves and chimney smoke. Benny trotted beside me without a leash, never straying more than a few steps away. He kept checking on me, like I might disappear. We passed the old park on Elm Street. I hadn't set foot there since the divorce. I hesitated. Benny didn't. He walked right in through the gate, sniffed the corners like he was cataloging the past. At one point, he stopped near the edge of the playground and stared at something buried in a pile of dead leaves. Then, very gently, he reached in with his mouth and pulled out a small, muddy toy. A rubber dinosaur, green and half torn. My heart stopped. That toy had belonged to my nephew. He used to bring it with him every time he visited. Years ago, before the visit stopped, before the silence settled in. What the hell, Benny? I whispered. He dropped it at my feet and sat down, tail brushing leaves behind him, waiting. I picked up the toy, turned it over in my hand. It was unmistakable. How'd you find this? He didn't answer, of course, but his eyes, those dark, searching eyes, held something I couldn't explain, like he was reminding me of something I'd buried too. That evening, I didn't put him back outside. I closed the door and locked it, and when I turned around, Benny was already in the hallway, waiting to follow me wherever I was going. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Benny had a way of moving through the house like he'd been there before. He didn't sniff every corner like most puppies would. He didn't chew the furniture or bark at shadows. He simply existed, quiet, aware, watching me more than anything else. That morning, I caught him staring at the photo on the fireplace mantel. It was a framed picture of me and Sarah, taken 6 years ago on our anniversary. We were laughing, half drenched in the rain, her arms around my shoulders. I hadn't looked at it in months, maybe longer. I'd left it there out of habit, not memory. But Benny sat there, gazing up at it, ears half lowered. When I approached, he didn't move. He just turned his head slightly to glance at me, like he was asking, "Who is she?" I sat down beside him on the floor. "That's Sarah," I said. "We used to live here together." Benny laid his head on his paws, eyes never leaving the photo. I don't know what made me keep talking, but I did. "She loved dogs, always wanted a shepherd, said they were noble, loyal." I paused, swallowing something hard. "We lost her mom one fall. After that, she stopped asking for a dog." Benny shifted closer, pressing against my leg, warm, silent presence. I let my hand rest on his back. We spent most of that day in a kind of rhythm. I read an old book in the recliner while Benny dozed nearby. When I got up to make lunch, he followed. Not clingy, just attentive. He never begged. He didn't whine. He waited. And when I sat down at the kitchen table, he settled beside my feet and rested his chin on my shoe. Just enough weight to remind me he was there. In the afternoon, I took him out to the back patio. The leaves had really started to fall now. Thick amber piles blanketed the yard. He pounced through them, ears flopping, mouth open in what looked a lot like a smile. I couldn't help but laugh. He turned to look at me, head cocked, then did it again, leaping into another drift of leaves, scattering them in every direction like orange confetti. "You're not even trying to be subtle, are you?" I said. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't laughing at him. I was laughing with him. Benny wasn't just a puppy playing in the leaves. He was giving me something I didn't know I still had inside me. Later, as the sun dipped low and turned the sky pink and gold, we sat on the back steps together. He pressed against my side, his breathing deep and slow. I looked down at him. "You sure you don't belong to someone?" He didn't move. No collar tag, no microchip that I'd found yet, no flyers in the neighborhood, just a German Shepherd puppy with a red scarf and eyes that saw through me. And something deep in my gut said he wasn't lost. He was looking for something. Or someone. And maybe, just maybe, he'd already found it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Paws padding across hardwood. Benny. I sat up and found him standing in the hallway, alert but calm, his tail swaying gently. It was early. Soft light pouring in through the blinds, catching the dust in the air. He gave one short wag when he saw I was awake, then turned and walked toward the front door, pausing just long enough to glance back at me. "You want to go somewhere?" I got dressed and grabbed my jacket. The wind had picked up overnight, and the air outside had that unmistakable October bite. Leaves swirled in little eddies on the street, crunching under our steps as we walked. Benny stuck close, always just a pace ahead, as if guiding me. He wasn't pulling or sniffing at everything. He had a direction, purpose, and I followed. He took me down a side street I hadn't walked in years, past the old bakery that had been shuttered since the pandemic, past the row of maple trees now dripping gold and rust-colored leaves. We crossed a narrow footbridge that led into the older part of town, where houses stood farther apart and fences leaned with time. Then he stopped. We stood at the edge of a small, overgrown park. The sign was faded, letters chipped. Maple Hollow Community Park. I hadn't thought about this place in forever. It was where Sarah and I used to bring her niece on weekends. She loved this park. The sandbox, the rickety swing, the winding path through the trees. I remembered how Sarah would pack a thermos of hot cider and sit on the bench near the big oak while her niece played for hours. Benny trotted through the gate without hesitation. I followed slowly, almost uncertain. Leaves crunched beneath our feet as we made our way toward the old oak. Then he stopped again. Nose to the ground, tail still. He sniffed the base of the tree, pawed gently at the soil. Then carefully he dug, just a little, enough to unearth something buried beneath a thin layer of dirt and wet leaves. I knelt beside him and brushed it off. A child's mitten. Tiny, pink, woolen. Faded and familiar. I held it in my hands, heart pounding. I remembered this. Sarah's niece had dropped it during one of our last visits. We looked for it everywhere that day. She cried all the way home. And here it was. "How did you find this?" I whispered. Benny sat down beside me, calm and still, eyes on the mitten in my hand. There was no reason he should have known. No scent trail left after all this time. No sign. But somehow this German Shepherd puppy had led me straight to a memory I didn't even know I needed. Back home, I placed the mitten on the mantel, next to the photograph. Benny lay on the rug, resting his head between his paws, watching me quietly. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Because for the first time, it felt like this puppy wasn't just here with me. He was here for me. It was the first night I left the back door open. The air was crisp but not freezing, and Benny had taken to sleeping near the threshold, as if guarding the silence between us and the world. I figured he liked the outside. Wind, leaves, the smell of old trees. Maybe it reminded him of something I'd never know. I went to bed early, thinking he'd settle in the hallway like always. But when I woke just before dawn, the space beside the door was empty. The towel was untouched. The food bowl still full. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, cold creeping into my chest faster than the floor. Benny? No sound. No tail thump. No soft rustling from the hallway. I called again. Louder this time. Still nothing. The panic came quick. I threw on boots and a flannel, grabbed a flashlight, and ran out into the yard. The wind had picked up overnight, carrying leaves and spinning waves across the grass. I scanned the fence line, opened the side gate, called his name again and again. My voice cracked from the cold air and rising dread. I walked through the neighborhood, flashlight beam bouncing off parked cars and mailboxes. It was too early for anyone else to be out. The streets were empty, quiet, like the whole world was holding its breath. By the time I reached the trailhead near Maple Hollow Park, my pulse was hammering in my throat. I stepped into the woods, heart pounding. Benny. Then I heard it. Not a bark, just movement. Leaves shifting, small, cautious steps. I turned my light toward the sound. Benny appeared between two trees, limping slightly, his black and tan coat speckled with dirt, his eyes locked on mine. Not scared, not guilty, just tired. And in his mouth he was carrying something. I knelt down as he approached, and he gently set it at my feet. A small fleece mitten, faded blue with a stitched yellow star, the kind you'd find at a dollar store, meant for kids. It smelled faintly of old perfume and something sweeter underneath. My breath caught. It was Sarah's niece's mitten. I remembered this one. She lost it years ago at this very park. We searched for it until the sun went down, and I ended up carrying her back to the car in tears. She called it her lucky star mitten. I picked it up slowly, pressing it to my face. It still held a trace of that day. Laughter, cider, falling leaves. Benny sat beside me, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. "You went looking for this?" I whispered. He didn't move. We walked back in silence. My hand curled around the mitten like it might vanish. When we got home, I cleaned his paw. It was scraped but nothing serious, and wrapped it gently while he licked my wrist. Later, as he lay on the rug with his head on his paws, I placed the mitten next to the photo on the mantel. I didn't know why he brought it back, but I knew what it meant. This German Shepherd puppy wasn't just remembering something, he was helping me remember too. The days after that felt different. Benny didn't just follow me anymore, he moved with me, like he'd synced to my pace, my rhythm, my silence. I stopped closing doors between rooms. I stopped rushing my mornings. There was something in his presence that softened the edges of everything. I found myself reaching for routines I'd long abandoned. I made coffee the way Sarah used to like it, black with a little cinnamon. I turned on music while I cooked, even if it was just the radio. And when Benny curled up at my feet, I spoke to him without thinking. Not in sentences, in memories. "Sarah would have liked you," I said once, scratching behind his ear. He let out a deep, satisfied sigh. We started walking the neighborhood each morning just after sunrise. No leash. He didn't need one. That German Shepherd puppy never strayed more than a few feet. Sometimes he'd pause beside the same patch of fence or nudge at the same mailbox like he was looking for something I couldn't see. But he never pulled, never rushed, just walked with purpose. On the fourth day, we passed a woman on her porch. She was watering a row of mums with shaking hands. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Well, aren't you two something?" she said. I smiled back, awkward. "He kind of found me." "He's a shepherd, all right," she nodded. "Looks like he found exactly where he's supposed to be." When we got back, I sat on the back steps and watched him explore the yard. His limp had healed quickly. He moved with a kind of grace I hadn't noticed before. Strong, quiet, precise. Everything about him said protector, even though he barely made a sound. Later that afternoon, I went looking through the closet in the hallway. Not for anything in particular, just curiosity. There was a box of Sarah's things I hadn't opened since the divorce. I sat cross-legged on the floor and pulled it down. Benny came over and sat beside me. Inside the box were scarves, old letters, a cracked phone charger, and near the bottom, a Polaroid I'd forgotten existed. It was of Sarah and her niece sitting on that very park bench, mitten in hand, both grinning like they'd just discovered treasure. I stared at it for a long time, throat tight. Benny pressed his head into my shoulder. "I'm starting to think," I whispered. "You're not just here for me." His ears perked slightly. "Maybe you're here for her, too." That night, I left the door to my bedroom open. Benny waited until the lights were out before he padded in, circled once beside the bed, and settled against the frame. I reached down, hand finding the soft fur behind his neck, and for the first time in years, I fell asleep without dreaming of silence. The next morning started like all the others, quiet, slow, a kind of peace I wasn't used to. Benny lay curled near the bedroom door, tail wagging once when I stirred. I'd stopped setting alarms. I didn't need them anymore. Somehow he knew when I was ready to face the day. We took our usual walk, up past the bakery, through the trees near the park, looped around the corner with the old fire hydrant where he liked to pause and sniff. But today something felt different. He was more alert, not anxious, not afraid, just focused. His ears twitched more often, his head lifted at distant sounds. He kept glancing up at me like he wanted to speak. Back at the house, I filled his water bowl and sat down on the couch. He stayed near the door, unmoving, eyes on me. "You okay?" I asked. He gave a short chuff in response, then turned to the door, then back to me. You want to go out again? He turned a slow circle in place, a behavior I'd started recognizing as his way of saying yes. All right, I said, grabbing my coat. This time he led us somewhere new. We walked 5 blocks south into a different part of the neighborhood. Older houses, wide lawns, fewer fences. Benny moved slower, nose to the ground, following some invisible thread. We stopped in front of a small yellow house with a cracked driveway and a faded plastic tricycle tipped over on the porch. Benny sat. I waited. The door opened a few seconds later. A teenage girl stepped out holding a leash in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked up, saw us, and froze. "That your dog?" she asked. I hesitated. Sort of. Why? She looked down at Benny, then back at me. He looks exactly like our old dog, Max. He disappeared a few months ago, but Max was older. This one's a pup, I said. About 6 months, maybe. She nodded slowly. Still, same eyes. A voice called from inside. She turned, mumbled something, and went back in. Benny didn't move, just sat there, still as stone. After a minute, I knelt beside him. "You know this place?" He didn't react, but something shifted in his posture, like he'd made peace with whatever was here. We walked back home quietly. No tugging, no rush, just that steady, thoughtful pace. When we returned, I poured myself a coffee and sat by the window. Benny stayed in the doorway for a long time, with I looking out at the wind moving through the leaves. Then he stepped forward into the room and curled beside my chair like he was finally done searching. That afternoon, I made the appointment. We'd avoided the vet up until now, mostly because I wasn't ready. Bringing him in meant commitment. It meant ownership. It meant admitting out loud that he was mine. At the clinic, they scanned him for a microchip. Nothing. The vet gave him a clean bill of health. Strong heart, good weight, healing well. As she finished, she looked up at me. "He's got great instincts," she said. "Very centered, not skittish. He's been cared for." "Until he wasn't," I muttered. She nodded. "You keeping him?" I looked down at Benny. He looked up at me. "I think he already made that decision." That evening, after the vet visit, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. It was where I kept old keys, mismatched socks, a few rusted tools, and one unopened dog tag from a shelter fundraiser Sarah dragged me to 6 years ago. Back then, she joked, "You never know. Maybe one day we'll need it." It was brass, blank, waiting to be engraved. Benny lay near the fireplace, watching me. He didn't move, but his eyes followed everything, my hands, my breath, the stillness in the room. He always did that, like he was trying to read between the words I wasn't saying. I ran my thumb over the tag. Then I picked up the phone and called the pet store across town. Engraving would take 10 minutes. As I spoke, Benny stood, walked slowly over, sat down in front of me. "You're really not going anywhere, are you?" I whispered. His tail thumped once. At the store, I handed over the blank tag. "Name?" the guy behind the counter asked. "Benny," I said, and it landed in my mouth like it had always been there. He engraved the tag. 5 minutes later, it was warm in my hand. I clipped it to a new blue collar, sturdy and simple. When I buckled it around Benny's neck, he stood perfectly still. And when it clicked into place, he leaned against me, just slightly, but enough to say, "I know." We walked home slow. The sun was setting, the sidewalk golden under our feet. Halfway back, a little boy and his mother passed by. The boy tugged on his mom's coat and pointed. "That doggie's smiling," he said. His mom laughed. "He does look happy." And Benny was. I could feel it in how he moved, like the tension he'd carried since the day he arrived had finally eased. Back home, I set the tag packaging on the counter and poured some water into his bowl. He drank a little, then padded over to the front door, sat down, stared, then looked back at me. "What is it?" He turned his head toward the door again, then back, a quiet insistence. So I opened it. Benny stepped onto the porch, sat, looked out over the street like he had something to say to the wind. I stood beside him, arms crossed, the cold air brushing my face. It hit me then, not like a thought, but like a memory rising from somewhere deeper. He hadn't just chosen me. He had been choosing every day since he arrived. Each place he walked to, each time he paused at a photo or dug near a tree, every time he rested his head on my knee. This German Shepherd puppy had been searching for his place in the world, and somehow he'd decided I was part of it. I sat beside him on the top step. He nudged his head into my side, and we watched the wind together, quiet and whole. It started with a sound I hadn't heard from him before, a low whine, barely audible, drifting through the quiet of early morning. I sat up in bed. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the room held that pale, silvery light that comes just before dawn. Benny wasn't at the foot of the bed like usual. He was by the door, lying on his side. Benny? He didn't lift his head. I was on the floor in seconds, hands reaching gently for him. His body was warm, but his breathing was shallow. His ears twitched faintly, his nose dry. "Hey, hey, what's going on?" I whispered. He let out another soft whine. I didn't wait. I wrapped him in the same fleece blanket he'd slept on for weeks, grabbed my keys, and carried him to the truck. He didn't fight, didn't flinch, just rested his head against my chest like he was too tired to do anything else. The vet clinic opened in 40 minutes. I drove anyway. The streets were empty, dew clinging to the windshield, the sky a bruised blue. Every red light felt too long, every bump in the road too loud. "Hang in there, Benny," I murmured. "I've got you." He didn't respond. We sat in the parking lot until the first tech arrived. I flagged her down before she could unlock the front door. "It's my dog," I said. "Something's wrong." She didn't ask questions, just nodded and waved me inside. They took him from my arms. I hated the emptiness that filled me the second he left them. I paced the waiting room for what felt like hours. My mind spiraled into places I didn't want to go. What if he hadn't eaten something bad? What if it was something deeper? Some hidden thing from before he found me? The door opened. The vet, same woman from before, smiled gently. "He's okay." I exhaled so hard I nearly collapsed into the chair. "Looks like he picked up a stomach virus," she said. "It's been going around. He's a little dehydrated and had a mild fever, but we've given him fluids and some meds. He's already perking up." I nodded, covering my face with my hands. "You did the right thing bringing him in." When they brought him out, Benny walked slowly, but his eyes found mine right away. His tail gave a slow wag, then another. He leaned into me as I knelt down and wrapped my arms around his neck. "You scared me," I whispered into his fur. "Don't ever do that again." He licked my cheek once, then rested his head on my shoulder. The ride home was silent. I rolled down the window just enough for him to feel the air, his ears catching the breeze. His eyes stayed on me most of the way, like he needed to make sure I was still there, too. Back at the house, I carried him inside and laid him on the couch. He didn't move for a while, just dozed. I sat beside him, fingers resting lightly on his paw, and I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit until that morning. He wasn't just my dog. He was my family. And whatever life I thought I was living before he arrived, it didn't start until he scratched on my door. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid anymore, but because I didn't want to miss anything. Benny lay curled beside the bed, his new collar gently clinking whenever he shifted. I kept reaching down, fingers brushing his fur, just to make sure he was still there, still warm, still mine. When the sun came up, he stood on his own, stretched, and walked to the window like he always did, like nothing had changed. But everything had. I made breakfast for both of us. Eggs for me, plain chicken and rice for him. He ate with his usual quiet dignity, then waited near the door with that look he gave when he was ready to walk. Not just for fresh air, but for something bigger. We walked slow. The city was starting to decorate for Halloween. Plastic pumpkins, fake cobwebs, kids' drawings taped to storm doors. I noticed details I hadn't before. How many trees were losing their leaves? How many houses had lights on, even in the morning? At the park, Benny led me to the bench again, the same one from the photo, from the memory, from everything. He jumped up and sat beside me, not at my feet. Beside me. I laughed softly. "You think you're people now?" He looked ahead, tail sweeping slowly across the wood. We sat like that a long time. At some point, an elderly man walking a Dachshund passed by and gave us a little wave. "Fine-looking pup," he said. I smiled. "Yeah, he is." Benny pressed his head into my side. Later, as we headed home, a light rain began to fall, gentle, steady, cold. I tugged my jacket tighter, but Benny kept his pace, confident, strong. The little scrape on his paw had healed. His coat had filled out. He no longer looked like a stray. He looked like he belonged. When we reached the house, I paused at the steps and looked down at him. "You picked me," I said. "Out of everyone in the world, you came to me." His ears twitched. He gave me that look, curious, direct, unwavering, and I knew. He hadn't chosen me because I was ready. He chose me because I wasn't, because I needed to believe again. In connection, in trust, in second chances. Inside, I dried him off with an old towel and sat down on the floor next to him. He climbed halfway into my lap, something he hadn't done before, and rested his head against my chest. I closed my eyes. I remembered the man I was before he showed up. Quiet, guarded, half alive. And I thought, he didn't save me from something terrible. He reminded me how to live. This puppy didn't need rescuing. I did. Some stories don't begin with a cry for help. Some begin with a quiet scratch at the door and a choice neither of you knew you were making. Benny never asked for anything. He didn't come with a rescue file or a tragic backstory. He came with a scarf, a stare, and a kind of stillness that said, I see you. I choose you. This puppy didn't just walk into my life. He rearranged it, piece by piece, breath by breath. I didn't rescue him. He rescued me. From silence, from loneliness, from the story I thought was already over. Now, when people ask if he's mine, I just smile. Because truth is, I'm his. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. There are so many others like him, waiting, watching, hoping someone will open the door and see them. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Every view, every like, every comment helps more stories like Benny's come true. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.